The zip tie bit into Colonel Naomi Osei-Hargrove's wrist with a snap that echoed off the polished marble floor of the Redo Center. The security guard who'd applied it, a heavy-set man whose name tag read Bryce, stepped back with the satisfied look of someone who'd just solved a problem. He hadn't solved anything. He had just created the worst professional crisis of his career, and he didn't know it yet. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October. Ottawa had turned cold overnight, the kind of cold that bites through wool coats and reminds you winter in this country doesn't negotiate. The mall was busy. Holiday decorations had gone up early. Tinsel and synthetic pine boughs draped over the second-floor railings. Shoppers moved through the ground-floor atrium with that particular urgency of people who have somewhere else to be. Naomi Osei-Hargrove did not look like trouble. She was 51 years old, wearing dark slacks and a burgundy turtleneck, her hair natural and close-cropped. She had the kind of bearing that comes not from arrogance but from 30 years of being the person everyone else looks to when things go wrong. She had been grocery shopping. Specifically, she'd been returning a faulty kitchen appliance to a home goods store on the second level. A small, irritating errand she'd squeezed between a morning briefing at CFB Uplands and a late afternoon call with her counterpart in Brussels. She had the receipt. She had the box. She had been standing quietly in the returns line for 11 minutes. What she didn't have, apparently, was the right look. Bryce had appeared at her elbow, the way a certain kind of authority always appears, sideways without warning, already in motion. He'd tapped her shoulder and asked her to step aside. When she asked why, he'd said there had been a report. When she asked what kind of report, he'd said someone had seen her acting suspiciously near the electronics display on the main floor. Naomi had never been near the electronics display. She'd come in through the south entrance, taken the escalator directly to level 2, and joined the returns queue. She told him this. Bryce hadn't been listening. He'd already reached for his radio. His supervisor, a younger man named Darren, who wore his lanyard with the energy of someone who'd recently been promoted, arrived inside 3 minutes. Darren looked at Naomi. He looked at Bryce. Then he looked at the box in her arms, a countertop convection oven, still in its original packaging. That's a floor model, Darren said. You can't return floor models. It isn't a floor model, Naomi said. She held up the receipt. I purchased it 6 days ago. The heating element failed. Darren glanced at the receipt the way people glance at things they've already decided not to believe. He shook his head. We're going to need to hold you while we verify this. There have been some incidents in this wing. Naomi asked what incidents. Neither man answered. She asked again. Bryce told her to lower her voice. She hadn't raised it. That was when the zip tie came out. It wasn't legal. She knew it wasn't legal. Retail security guards in Ontario have the same power of arrest as any private citizen. They can detain you if they've personally witnessed a crime, and they must call police immediately. Bryce had witnessed nothing. There was no crime. The zip tie was theatre, and it was also assault, and Naomi stood very still while it clicked shut, because she had spent 30 years learning that the most dangerous thing a black woman can do in a tense situation with a man holding a plastic restraint is move quickly. There were people watching. A teenager near the fountain had already raised his phone. Naomi clocked it. Good. She looked at Darren. I'd like to make a call. You'll make a call at the security office, he said. Darren, she said. And something in the way she said his name made him pause for just a moment. The way people pause when a tone doesn't match the situation they thought they were controlling. I'm going to make that call now, or you are going to find out very quickly why that would have been the better choice. He let her make the call. She dialed from memory. It rang once. The voice that picked up belonged to her aide, a sharp-minded captain named Forsyth, who had learned in his first week that when Osei-Hargrove called outside scheduled hours, the correct response was immediate action, not pleasantries. Forsyth, she said, I'm at the Rideau Center. I need you to contact General Ashford's office and advise them I may be late for the Brussels call. Then I need you to have someone from the JAG office call this number. She read out Darren's lanyard ID number from 3 feet away. His face changed. Who are you calling? Bryce asked. Force's Legal Affairs, Naomi said simply, and watched the color drain from his face. What happened in the next 40 minutes was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. There were no helicopters, no convoy of black SUVs. What happened was quieter, and somehow worse for everyone involved. The JAG officer called within 7 minutes. He spoke to Darren for approximately 90 seconds. By the end of those 90 seconds, Darren was no longer making eye contact with anyone. Then, the mall's regional director of operations called the security firm's head of client relations. Then the firm's head of client relations called the on-site manager. Then the on-site manager, a harried woman named Patricia, who had clearly been pulled away from something else, appeared in the security office doorway, took one look at Naomi sitting in a plastic chair with a zip tie on her wrist and a returned appliance at her feet and said, in a voice entirely devoid of composure, "Cut that off her, now." Bryce cut it off. The red mark on Naomi's wrist stayed for 2 days. Patricia apologized. It came out in pieces, uneven and too fast, the kind of apology that is mostly about the person giving it. Naomi accepted it without warmth. She stood, picked up her appliance box, and walked to the returns counter, where the original cashier, a young woman who had watched the whole thing and said nothing and clearly felt terrible about it, processed the refund in approximately 45 seconds. Naomi thanked her. She took the escalator back to the ground floor. Near the south exit, the teenager who'd been filming was still there. He'd lowered his phone, but he was watching her. She stopped. "Are you all right?" she asked him. He blinked. "Me? You look shaken." He was maybe 17. He had the look of someone who'd just seen something he didn't have a framework for yet. "That was messed up," he said. "Like, you didn't do anything." "I know," she said. "Does that happen to you a lot?" She thought about the honest answer to that question. "It's the first time with a zip tie," she said. He almost laughed. She almost did too. She told him to have a good evening and walked out into the cold. What came after was not something Naomi engineered. She didn't call the media. She didn't post anything. The teenager did, because teenagers do. And by the time she was home and had made herself a cup of tea, the clip had 40,000 views and a comment section that was the internet, at its most predictably divided, half outrage, half demanding to know what she'd actually done. The answer, of course, was nothing, but the clip didn't show what she was, and that turned out to matter more than she would have liked it to. A journalist from the Ottawa Citizen called her aide the next morning. Forsyth asked her what she wanted to do. Naomi sat with the question for longer than he expected. The easy thing would have been to let it go. She'd had the zip tie removed. She'd gotten her refund. She had a busy week, a Brussels call to reschedule, a budget submission due Friday. The easy thing was to be the bigger person in the way black women in Canada are perpetually expected to be the bigger person. Quietly, invisibly, without making anyone uncomfortable. She thought about the teenager's face. "Does that happen to you a lot?" She called the journalist back herself. The story ran on a Saturday. By Monday, it had been picked up nationally. The security firm issued a statement calling the incident regrettable and announcing an internal review. The mall's parent company issued a separate statement with slightly different language that meant the same thing. Both statements were careful not to name Naomi's rank, because they hadn't known it when they drafted the first response and found out partway through drafting the second, which only made everything worse for them. Because what the clip didn't show, what the teenager's phone hadn't captured in the 11 minutes before he started recording, was the part where Darren had looked at a 51-year-old black woman in a burgundy turtleneck returning a broken appliance with a receipt in her hand, and decided, based entirely on what he saw, that she was the kind of person who needed to be detained. Colonel Naomi Osei-Hargrove had served in the Canadian Armed Forces for 31 years. She had 2 tours in Afghanistan. She had been part of the planning team for the evacuation coordination in Kabul in 2021, working 70-hour weeks from a room in Ottawa that smelled of stale coffee and fluorescent light, managing logistics for a crisis that didn't pause for sleep. She had been awarded the Meritorious Service Medal twice. She was, at the time of the incident, the Senior Logistics Officer for Joint Operations Command, responsible for the coordination of military assets across 4 time zones. Her next promotion was already in process. She would pin on Brigadier General before the following spring. Darren had not known any of this. The point, as Naomi said in the interview, carefully and without theatre, was that he shouldn't have needed to. The firm's internal review concluded in 3 weeks. Bryce was terminated. Darren was placed on indefinite suspension pending further process. The regional director of operations resigned, though the statement described it as a mutual decision, which is what those statements always say. The firm announced mandatory retraining for all Ontario personnel and commissioned an independent equity audit of its operational protocols. None of this made the news cycle the way the original clip had. The accountability portion of the story rarely does. There was a parliamentary question about it. A member from a riding in Toronto asked the Public Safety Minister whether the federal government planned to review the use of physical restraints by private security firms on customers in commercial spaces. The minister said they were monitoring the situation. That answer meant nothing, and everyone knew it, but it was in Hansard now, which meant someone could point to it later. The thing that stuck, the thing people kept coming back to in the comment sections, and the radio call-in shows, and the break room conversations that Naomi heard about secondhand, was a single sentence from her interview. She'd been asked whether she thought what had happened to her was unusual. She'd paused in the way she always paused before saying something she'd thought carefully about. "I think it was unusual for me," she said. "I have resources. I had a phone and a number to call, and someone who picked up in 7 minutes. Most people don't have that. What happened to me is ordinary. I just happened to be in a position to make it inconvenient to ignore." The journalist had let that sit in silence for a moment before moving to the next question. It was the right call. Some sentences don't need a follow-up. The formal complaint was filed through the Canadian Human Rights Commission. The process was slow and unglamorous and entirely necessary. Naomi didn't enjoy it. She also didn't stop. 3 months after the incident, she was invited to speak at a conference on equity in public and private security sectors. She stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom in Toronto, wearing her dress uniform for the first time. In the context of this particular story, the medals on her chest a quiet and specific argument. She spoke for 22 minutes without notes. She talked about what it costs to stay calm in a situation designed to make you react. She talked about what gets lost when the people who have the resources to fight back decide the fight isn't worth it. She talked about the teenager with the phone who'd asked her if this happened a lot, and how she hadn't been able to give him the answer he deserved, which was, yes, and it shouldn't, and I'm sorry you already know that at 17. At the end she said, the zip tie didn't come from nowhere. It came from a decision someone made in a moment, based on what they thought they could get away with. Changing that decision is not about training one guard. It's about what we teach people to see when they look at someone they don't know. The room was very quiet. She thanked them and stepped away from the podium. Outside the hotel, waiting for her car, she stood in the November dark. Ottawa was 3 hours away. She had an early meeting. The Brussels call had been rescheduled and completed. The budget submission had been filed on time. The work had continued, as work always continues, indifferent to everything that happens around it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Forsyth. The promotion paperwork had cleared the final stage. She'd be getting the official call tomorrow. She put the phone away, pulled her coat tighter. The city moved around her. Taxis, a streetcar, someone's dog straining at a leash toward a puddle that had iced over at the edges. 31 years. Every room where she'd had to be twice as prepared to get half the credit. Every moment of keeping her voice level when she wanted to raise it. Every time she'd narrated her own movements, slowly, clearly, so that no one would have an excuse. She had not become who she was because the country had made it easy. She had become who she was in spite of the places where it hadn't. The car came. She got in. The road north was clear. Bryce and Darren had thought they were managing a situation. What they had done, without knowing it, was choose the wrong moment to make the wrong call about the wrong person. The system that had protected them before did not protect them this time. And the reason it didn't, the reason it couldn't, was that the woman they'd zip-tied in the returns queue had spent 31 years learning exactly how to make that kind of thing impossible to ignore. They had treated her like someone no one was coming for. They were wrong. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. We read everyone. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Voices of Courage for more stories about the people who stood their ground when it cost them something to do so.